A statement defending a girlfriend from tabloid harassment. That's what started it. Not the step back from royal duties years later, not the interviews, not the memoir. A press release in 2016 that said what most people watching already thought: the coverage of Meghan Markle had crossed a line. And according to a new book by Russell Myers, that single act of protection was seen inside the palace not as justified concern, but as a breach of protocol so serious it sparked fury among senior royals and set in motion a chain of events nobody could control. The book, titled William and Catherine, positions this moment as more than just a PR decision gone wrong. It frames it as a violation of the way things are done, a departure from royal tradition that made King Charles and Prince William look ineffective by comparison. The accusation is simple: Harry broke the rules. He went public when he should have stayed quiet. He defended Meghan when the established process was to let the storm pass. And in doing so, he didn't just anger the tabloids, he angered his family. What's striking here isn't that Harry defended someone he cared about, it's that doing so was treated as a problem at all. The statement itself was measured. It acknowledged the difficulty of a new relationship under public scrutiny. It pointed out the racial undertones in some coverage. It described harassment of Meghan's family and invasive behavior by photographers. Harry himself later called some of the reporting utterly disgusting. For anyone outside the royal structure, the statement looked like what any decent partner would do. But inside the palace, it was read differently. It was interference. It was visibility. It was, apparently, betrayal. The royal family has always had a specific way of dealing with bad press. They don't respond publicly. They don't issue statements calling out journalists by name. They work behind the scenes through palace communications teams, through carefully worded off the record briefings, through established channels that allow for pressure without spectacle. It's a system built on discretion and control. It protects the institution by refusing to engage in public battles that can't be won. And for decades, it worked, or at least it worked well enough that the system itself was never seriously questioned. Harry's decision to issue that statement bypassed all of that. It took an internal matter and made it external. It forced the palace into a position where silence could be read as either complicity or indifference. And according to Myers's account, that's exactly what made Charles and William so angry. Not that Harry was wrong about the harassment, not even that he felt protective, but that his protection came in a form that exposed their lack of similar action. When Kate Middleton faced invasive coverage early in her relationship with William, there was no public statement. When Camilla was vilified in the press for years, Charles didn't release a defense through official channels. The unspoken rule was endurance. You weather the storm, you don't escalate it. What Harry did, intentionally or not, was create a comparison. His public defense of Meghan made the previous silences from William and Charles look like abandonment. It suggested that the women in their lives had been left to fend for themselves, while Meghan at least had someone willing to speak up. That's the subtext running through this new book's claims. The anger wasn't really about protocol, it was about being shown up. It was about Harry doing something that made their restraint look like cowardice. There's an irony in framing Harry's statement as rule breaking while ignoring the context that made the statement necessary. The coverage of Meghan in late 2016 wasn't typical royal gossip. It wasn't speculation about wedding dates or fashion choices. It included explicit racial commentary, invasive photos, harassment of her family, and articles dissecting her background in ways that had clear subtext. The tabloids weren't just covering a story, they were constructing a narrative designed to undermine her before she'd even been formally introduced to the public. And the palace strategy, according to the traditional playbook, was to do nothing publicly and hope it would fade. Harry looked at that situation and made a different choice. He saw the harassment escalating and decided that silence wasn't neutral, it was complicity. That calculation might have been naive in terms of palace politics, but it wasn't irrational. The problem is that the royal family doesn't operate on rationality in the way most people understand it. It operates on precedent, on image management, on the idea that the institution's stability matters more than individual discomfort. Harry's statement prioritized Meghan's well being over institutional cohesion. And that, more than anything else, is what seems to have been unforgivable. What makes this moment so significant in hindsight is that it reveals how early the fracture began. This wasn't a reaction to years of frustration. This was 2016. Harry and Meghan had been dating for months, not years. They weren't married, they weren't even engaged. And yet the response to his defense of her was already hostile enough to be described as fury. That suggests the problem wasn't really about one statement. It was about what the statement represented. It was about Harry asserting his own judgment over the palace's established process. It was about him signaling, perhaps without fully realizing it, that he wasn't going to follow the script. The books claim that this incident marked an early turning point in Harry's relationship with William and Charles is probably accurate, but not for the reasons the palace might prefer. It wasn't that Harry was reckless or impulsive. It's that he encountered a situation where the family's preferred approach, silence, and endurance felt inadequate to him. And when he acted on that feeling, the response wasn't support or even measured disagreement. It was anger, it was accusation, it was being told he'd made them look bad. That kind of reaction teaches a lesson. It teaches that protecting someone you care about will be treated as disloyalty. It teaches that the institution's image is more important than individual harm. It teaches that you're expected to absorb damage quietly. Harry has talked about this period in other contexts. In his memoir, Spare, and in interviews, he's described feeling that his family didn't protect Meghan, that they saw her treatment as either deserved or manageable, that they prioritized avoiding conflict with the press over supporting her. This new book, written from a perspective much more sympathetic to William and Charles, inadvertently confirms Harry's version of events. It just frames the same facts differently. Where Harry saw abandonment, the palace saw protocol. Where Harry saw racism and harassment, the palace saw manageable press cycles. Where Harry saw the need for intervention, the palace saw an overreaction. The broader context here is that Harry's battles with the British tabloids didn't begin or end with that 2016 statement. He's currently engaged in multiple legal cases against major UK publishers. He's accused them of phone hacking, illegal information gathering, and sustained invasion of privacy. Some of his claims have been dismissed by judges, some are ongoing. The publisher's lawyers have called parts of his case utterly crazy, which gives you a sense of how hostile the litigation has become. Harry has testified that he never had friendly relationships with tabloid journalists, that he saw their work as fundamentally damaging, and that the pressure from constant surveillance and negative coverage has shaped his entire adult life. That's the lens through which the 2016 statement has to be understood. Harry wasn't reacting to one bad headline. He was reacting to a pattern he recognized because he'd lived it himself. He knew what it felt like to be the target. He knew how the tabloids operated, how they justified invasive coverage as public interest, how they spun narratives that served their circulation numbers rather than truth. And he saw that same machinery turning toward Meghan with a viciousness that seemed to him racially motivated and personally cruel. His decision to speak out wasn't about breaking protocol for its own sake. It was about refusing to watch someone else be destroyed the way his mother had been. But the palace doesn't operate on that logic. The palace operates on the assumption that the institution survives by avoiding fights it can't control. Public statements are risks. Public criticisms of the press are declarations of war. And wars with the tabloids are wars the monarchy has historically chosen not to fight because fighting them means giving up the very control the palace relies on. Harry's statement was a rupture in that understanding. It said out loud that the press was behaving unacceptably. And once you say that, you can't unsay it. You've committed to a position, you've made yourself a target. What's interesting is how the palace's anger at Harry's statement compares to their response when William issued legal threats and complaints about press coverage of Kate. William has taken action against tabloids multiple times. He's sued over topless photos. He's complained about paparazzi harassment. He's used legal channels to push back when he felt the coverage crossed a line. But those actions were generally framed as protective and justified, not as breaches of protocol. The difference seems to be that William's approach still worked within the system. He used legal threats, not public condemnation. He targeted specific incidents, not systemic behavior. He didn't accuse the press of racism or cruelty in broad terms. He stayed within the boundaries of what the palace considered acceptable pushback. Harry didn't. His statement was broader, more direct, and more explicitly critical of the media's motivations. It didn't just say, this specific photo is inappropriate. It said, the way you're covering this person is racist and abusive. And that's a much bigger accusation. It's also much harder to walk back. And it aligns Harry not with palace protocol, but with a moral stance that's independent of institutional strategy. That's what seems to have triggered the fury Myers describes. It wasn't just that Harry broke the rules, it's that he replaced the palace's rulebook with his own judgment. The claim that this moment was a precursor to the eventual breakdown in Harry's relationships with William and Charles feels almost too neat. It's tempting to look back at 2016 and say, that's where it all went wrong. But the truth is probably more complicated. This wasn't the moment everything broke. It was the moment Harry realized the system he was part of wouldn't bend to protect someone he loved. It was the moment he learned that his family's priorities were different from his own. It was the moment the palace learned that Harry wasn't going to absorb criticism silently. What followed over the next few years, the escalating tensions, the lack of support Meghan described during her time as a working royal, the decision to step back in 2020, the interviews, the memoir, all of it can be traced back to the same fundamental conflict. Harry wanted protection for Meghan. The palace wanted stability for the institution. Those two things turned out to be incompatible. And the 2016 statement was the first public indication that when forced to choose, Harry would choose Meghan. The narrative Russell Myers presents in his book is sympathetic to William and Charles. It frames Harry as the problem, the rule breaker, the one who disrupted a functioning system. But that narrative only works if you accept the premise that the system was functioning. If you believe that the traditional palace approach to tabloid harassment was adequate, then Harry's statement looks like unnecessary escalation. But if you believe that approach was failing, that it left people vulnerable and unprotected, then Harry's statement looks like the only reasonable response. The palace saw breach of protocol, Harry saw moral obligation, and the gap between those two perspectives turned out to be unbridgeable. What this new book reveals, perhaps unintentionally, is how little room there was for negotiation. Harry didn't just break a rule, he challenged the assumption that the rule should exist. He asked implicitly why the monarchy's relationship with the press mattered more than the well being of the people inside the institution. And the answer he got, if Myers's account is accurate, was fury, not dialogue, not explanation. Fury. That tells you everything about how the palace saw the hierarchy of concerns. The institution came first, the individuals came second, and anyone who tried to reverse that order was a problem. It's worth noting that this story is being told now, years after the events, in a book about William and Catherine. It's not neutral reporting. It's part of a larger narrative project that positions William as the stable, dutiful heir and Harry as the disruptor who couldn't follow the rules. That framing has been consistent across much of the UK media coverage of the royal rift. Harry is emotional, impulsive, controlled by Meghan. William is steady, responsible, committed to duty. The 2016 statement fits neatly into that narrative. It becomes evidence of Harry's instability rather than evidence of a system that couldn't accommodate basic human decency. But the facts don't quite support that framing. Harry's statement was carefully worded. It was issued through official channels. It acknowledged the challenges of royal life and asked for basic respect. It wasn't a rant. It wasn't an attack. It was a boundary. And the reaction to it, according to this same book, was disproportionate anger. That suggests the problem wasn't really Harry's tone or timing. It was his willingness to set a boundary at all. What remains unresolved is whether anything could have been done differently. If Harry had stayed silent, would Meghan's treatment have improved? If the palace had issued its own statement, would the tabloids have backed off? If William and Charles had supported Harry's defense publicly, would the press have taken the hint? The answer to all of those questions is probably no. The tabloid media operates on commercial incentives, not royal preferences. Negative coverage of Meghan sold papers. That's what drove the behavior. And no amount of palace protocol was going to change that basic economic reality. What Harry's statement did was force everyone involved to stop pretending that staying quiet was a neutral choice. It made visible the harm that the traditional approach allowed to continue. It created a record that said, clearly, this is unacceptable. And it established that Harry was willing to take risks to protect someone he loved, even if that meant alienating his family. Those are the real consequences of that 2016 statement. Not that it broke royal rules, but that it revealed how much those rules were costing the people expected to follow them.